1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in OWS fam. So glad that you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab, as always, presented by 1 week season. And it is Monday. It is 9 a.m. Eastern time when we are recording this, Monday morning, October 21st. And the focus for tonight is Showdown, as always on Monday. We've got the 2-game slate tonight. We're going to be focusing, though, on the later game, the Chargers at the Cardinals. As always, the purpose of this show is build a lineup on DraftKings. Use that as a vehicle to talk through, in this case, the showdown for tonight. I'm your host, Cheeseman, and I am joined now by the one and only Xandamere. Xandamere, what's up, man? How was your week 7?
Man, every week of football is unique, right? And every week of football, you have some outlier outcomes that happen. But this last week was one of the weirdest weeks that I can remember, where it felt like half the running backs on the slate had really great games and essentially zero pass catchers did, right? Like if I can, off the top of my head, I think it was only one pass catcher got to the 100-yard bonus, which was Amon-Ra St. Brown. And even then he put up a good score, not a great score. So I haven't gone to look at all the wide receiver scores by price, by the price of the player, but off the top of my head, I think that there were effectively zero what you would call really good tournament scores for the price. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown was fine. You know, he got like 25 points or something like that, which is good, but at his price, it's not awesome. It's like fine. And of course, you're also thinking about who you stack with, right? Like if you're stacking a quarterback, like they effectively all failed, like all the stacking partners failed. The one guy, like there was one pass catcher, there were two pass catchers who really smashed, and they were both tight ends, which is exceptionally weird, right? It was Jonnu Smith on the Dolphins and David Njoku on the Browns. Then you had all these other weird, just like very outlier outcomes. Juju Smith-Schuster apparently got hurt in warmups, I believe, but the news didn't come out. I saw someone saying he got hurt in warmups. I'm not sure actually, but he didn't play, right? He just didn't play. Maybe he got hurt super early in the game and I didn't see, but like, you know, he didn't get a single target. What's his name? Jordan Whittington on the Rams, after having played, heavily the last few weeks, was benched in favor of Tyler Johnson, who's like this journeyman, NFL receiver who's never really shown an ability to succeed in the NFL level. I mean, Jordan Whittington, this guy, 10 targets last week, 8 targets the week before, caught 7 and 6 of those targets. That's good. Good before he'd been playing well. Like, it's not like he was playing poorly and they benched him. He was playing really well. And for some reason, they're like, no, Tyler Johnson. When you have a talent like Tyler Johnson, you just have to use him. So Whittington out of
Obviously,
here. Yeah. We had Jaden Daniels gets hurt in the first drive. Like just injuries left and right. Brandon Ayuk, he wasn't a highly owned player, but Brandon Ayuk, a season-ending ACL injury, right? Like just a combination of injuries and players just having very outlier, like bottom 10th percentile games. Travis Kelce had, what was it, like 8 receiving yards or something comical like that. Jaden Reed had 2 targets, I believe, or 3 targets to 2 catches.
Tank Dell had 0. CJ Stroud, 86 passing yards.
Yeah, the Texans kept scoring, and I don't know how. Mixon had a great game, right? But how did they make it down the field to be in position to score when CJ Stroud completed like 10 passes? Like, it's just this wild slate of games. And so, it's just a weird day where it's hard to assess, like, how did I do from a process perspective? Just, it's really easy to fall into the trap of just saying, trust the process and assuming that your process is good, because you're supposed to trust the process. But how do you know if your process is good or not? Right. Like that's hard to do. That's actually hard to figure out sometimes. And I think in this case, it's one of those where it's like, how do you know? Like it was playing Juju good process? I don't know. I think so. I think it was, but like got hurt, So anyway, I didn't have a great week. I think it was just a very, very bizarre week. I had one lineup that could have done something on Owner's Box, which if you don't play on Owner's Box, it's a great site because there's a ton of overlay on it. It's one of those smaller sites. Their flagship tournament this week was like $20K to first, but it had like I think it had like 6,000 out of 77,000 something entries. So like 15% ish overlay. That's awesome. It's free money, right? So I love sites like that. I had a lineup finish in the top 10. It had Dre Turner from the Raiders was the fight. It was a Packer. It's a super flex site. So no defense. Said you can have a super flex spot. So it was a Packers and Vikings lineup. So it had Sam Darnold and Jordan Love. Unfortunately, had Christian Watson as the Packers pass catcher, and then it had Dre Turner, who got 7. Like I needed him to score like 8 points to have a really nice day, and I think like 10 points would have banked it for me, or 10 or 11 points. And he got like 7 targets, but caught 2 for I think 13 yards. So that was my sweat. It was close. On a weird week like that, I will take having something close. It would have been nice to have done a little better there, but I'm not going to complain. But what a strange week it was.
Yeah. On Owner's Box, do you just hand build those? Like, is there any sites that do optimizers for it?
I use an optimizer. So, the solver is the optimizer that I mainly use. And if I can talk about this for just a minute, because I get questions about this a lot. Because OWS has a deal. We have an optimizer of our own called the Bank Machine. And sometimes people are like surprised that I don't use it. And I use the solver, which is obviously not our product. At the end of the day, for me, it's less about finding the quote unquote best optimizer. It's more about finding an optimizer that you know how to work with and putting the time in to understand the ins and outs of how it works and getting it to build the lineups that you want it to build. Because sometimes if you've used an optimizer much, sometimes you're like fighting with it. You're like battling with this thing to be like, you're like battling, like, come on, like
preach.
I know what I want. Just fucking give it to me. And you can't get it to give you what you want. And it's so frustrating. So a lot of it is just learning how to use it, learning the ins and outs, and really making it hum. And I know that with the solver because I've used it for a long time. And before that, I used Fantasy Labs, which is very, very similar. So it was easy to move over. Very, very similar functionality. So it's not about me thinking that the solver is better or worse than the Bank Machine that we have on AWS. It's just that this is the one I'm familiar with. This is the one I've invested countless hours in. And so it's just worth having that conversation because sometimes people like ask me what optimizer I use and they're shocked that I don't use OWS's optimizer, like as if I'm saying it's not good. And I'm not, right? Like OWS's optimizer is totally fine. The solver is totally fine. Right. Fantasy Labs is totally fine. There's a lot of optimizers in the market and you can succeed with any of them. Right. It's about learning how to make it work.
Absolutely. And as the MO of 1 week season is we want to teach you how to think for yourself. And so I don't think that it's the ethos of 1 week season to say you need to just do everything exactly the way, we think it should be done. It's like figure out how to do it for yourself. But to your point, yeah. I mean, especially if you're putting in like a ton of lineups every weekend, which I know you are. You're a multi-entry guy. To like switch to a different optimizer, it truly does take hours to really get it. Probably hours every week to really get all the settings dialed into what you want. So that completely makes sense. But I do need to check out Owner's Box and it's
an awesome. Yeah, I love the small sites. They don't have a milli maker, but I don't play the milli maker anyway. It's not my kind of tournament. It's why not take free money? And also like you're also getting, big name players play on those small sites, but they're investing less time there, right? They're building most of their time is spent where they have most of their money in play on the 2 big sites. So they're just kind of running stuff quickly on sites like Owner's Box or Yahoo. So they're investing, you're playing its players, you're investing less time. There's no content for it, right? Like I think the edge there is so much greater. And I preach this all the time, people who will listen, right? But most people want to play on DraftKings, which I get. But like for me, I don't do this for fun. The fact that it's fun to me is a side effect. I do this to make money, right? And so I'm gonna invest my money in the spots where I feel like it has the highest potential ROI. And so small sites that have overlay every week. I'm not gonna do sites that have like a tournament with the top prize $100. So it's not worth the hassle. But like we're still talking. Owner's Box's flagship tournament has been $20K to first place at least every week so far, right? Like that's enough to make me pay attention. I would love that. So totally 100%.
Worth it. Yeah. And just to that point, like, professionals in the financial industry, if you're fund managers, that kind of thing, they'll spend hours upon hours to improve their performance by 1 to 2%. If you can find little ways to increase your chances of being profitable by 5 to 10%, probably more in this case, it's absolutely worth it. So that's good stuff. Check it out. I mean, I'm definitely going to check it out for sure. I already had it in the back of my mind. Time gets away from you, and you just kind of like, you have kind of your habits, and it's just like start my week looking at where am I going to play on DraftKings, but with a little extra time, it's like I really want to check out Owner's Box. So, so I was going to pull up real quick this lineup from yesterday. I pulled this from I think the username from the 1 week season Discord. So shout out to this user who built this lineup. I think Discord Pewter Pirate was the user, but I just wanted, before we jump into tonight's game, really wanted to get your thoughts real quick on this lineup. I always like to see lineups that do well, and just what was the thought process behind this? Why did this work?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting lineup because it is a 1-5 construction. What I mean by that, when I say a 1-5 construction or a 4-2 construction, the first number is the side where the captain comes from. It is the terminology I use. And so there's only one jet, Breece Hall, and he's in the captain spot. This is a highly contrarian construction. It is very rare to see 1-5 lineups win, which is actually odd because if you think about it, the logic behind them makes sense. What you're effectively saying is on one team, the production is spread out widely. On the Steelers, you got like 5 different players. You're saying the production is spread out widely on the one team. On the other team, the production is highly concentrated in this one guy who's going to be my captain, Breece Hall. That sounds actually pretty reasonable, right? If you just say it that way, like you'd think that is a fairly reasonable kind of lineup construction, and that would win a lot or win a reasonable portion of the time. It turns out it doesn't. It turns out it's actually an exceptionally rare construction to win. And I don't say that to knock the person who made this build by any means, right? Like it can win. And at the end of the day, what your goal is with these lineups, when you build showdown lineups that are contrarian, is you're trying to differentiate in ways that are smart, in ways the field doesn't play. The field doesn't play 1-5 lineups at a very high rate at all. And so you could argue that even though the chance of it winning is very low, well, guess what? The chance of other people having this lineup is also pretty darn low. And so this actually was a 1v1 off the optimal lineup. So the optimal lineup would have swapped Jalen Warren for Chris Boswell, the Steelers kicker. So it won this tournament, right? And you can see, if you look at the flagship tournament for DraftKings, the $1.2 million flagship GPP, the lineup with Boswell in it took down first with 16 duplicates. So in a giant tournament, this tournament had 94,000 entries, the flagship GPP. It's 16-way split. Like obviously you'd love to win solo, but a 16-way split is pretty darn good. So first prize ended up being like 34K and change. A 16-way split is pretty low. Obviously, again, lower is better, right? We want fewer duplicates, we win. But the point is like in Showdown, you're always trying to walk this line of low duplication, but also reasonable chance to win. So the reason why the winning lineup was duplicated at a fairly high rate, despite being an unusual construction, is that none of the individual players were super low owned, besides Van Jefferson, 10%. But even that was still 10%, not like a 2% guy. And then the salary for the lineup, the optimal one, was $49,600. So it was close to the max, right? So that's another factor that's going to increase duplication. So when you think about differentiation, like this was a pretty sharp way to differentiate lineups. I like going in on Russell Wilson and the Steelers, basically saying like, look, Russell Wilson is going to inject some additional life into this passing offense. Justin Fields had led the Steelers to a 4-2 record, but he's not a pocket passer. He's not a high volume passer, right? He's more of a like control the game, run a lot. He opens up the run game by his own running ability. That's kind of quarterback he is. And Russell Wilson, at this stage in his career, doesn't really run anymore. He's more of a pure pocket passer. And you can see Russell Wilson was like 26% owned, right? That's incredibly low ownership for a starting quarterback in Showdown. Normally, quarterback ownership is right around the 50% mark on average, with guys like, with the real studs like Lamar pushing up to like the 70% range. And then, quote unquote bad quarterbacks, like backup quarterbacks, that you'll often see them down in the 30s and 40s, but 26% is shockingly low ownership. Now, I get why. Russell Wilson looked like dust in Denver. Russell Wilson has a reputation of being terrible. Russell Wilson is, the Steelers' passing offense does not have a reputation of being awesome. I get why people didn't want to play him, but at the end of the day, like, Russell Wilson did not look great for most of his time in Denver, but he had some games where he was actually quite good. He had some games where he was putting out fantasy points. If memory serves, for the first, this is purely off memory, but for the first several weeks of last season in Denver, while Russell Wilson was getting all this flack for being terrible, he was like the QB6 or something like that in fantasy scoring for the first like half of the season. Like, he wasn't awful. I'm making the numbers up, right? I don't remember exactly, so please don't call me on this. But like, he was up there. He was putting up pretty good fantasy numbers. So the idea that he can't be fantasy viable is kind of silly. And you see that, like, not a lot of lineups wanted to roster multiple Steelers pass catchers because the Steelers passing offense has been so bad. But the idea here is, look, Russell Wilson is a capable quarterback, and passing volume is also likely to be higher with him at quarterback than with Fields. And we know that the most important stat we care about is volume before all else, right? Volume, matchup, opportunity, price. Volume comes first. So, having two Steelers pass catchers, right? George Pickens, who we know is a great player, and then Van Jefferson, who is on the field a ton, hadn't been getting much in the way of targets from Justin Fields. But guess what? You add some more targets to the mix, and all of a sudden, he can support more receivers, right? Chris Boswell, kicker, is always a reasonable last plug-in, or in this case, it was Jaylen Warren. I will say that for me personally, adding Harris and Warren and Russ all in one lineup is a little bit of a reach. That said, I would venture a guess without knowing, but just glancing through, I'm looking at the big GPP and seeing, actually, there were about the same number of this lineup as there were of the Chris Boswell lineup. So it's about the same level of duplication. I would have picked Boswell over Jaylen Warren in this lineup just because, like, two running backs, you're always trying to think, how do two running backs on the same team hit at the same time? I would not have played Najee captain with Jaylen Warren and Russell Wilson at all, because there's just too much, like, you need too many things to go right in that scenario. With them both in flex, it's a little easier to play. But generally speaking, I tend to run at most two running backs and a quarterback on the same team, because you need touchdowns, and you need the running backs to get those touchdowns, but you also need the quarterback to throw for touchdowns. So what you essentially need, you already got the outlier score environment, which Pittsburgh scored 37 points, which is, that's most teams don't score 37 points in a game, especially not Pittsburgh Steelers. So you already got the outlier overall team score, but you would have needed Jaylen Warren to catch a passing touchdown here, right? Because if Jaylen Warren gets a rushing touchdown, then he's taking points away from Russ, right? So you kind of need him to get a passing touchdown. And though Jaylen Warren does traditionally get pretty good pass game usage, he doesn't get a lot of red zone pass game usage, right? And so his odds of catching a receiving touchdown are not zero, but they're pretty slim. And so in the same price range, I think Boswell was the stronger play. But this overall is a really sharp lineup that just takes the approach of, hey, what if? We ask what if questions in DFS and in Showdown all the time of, like, what if this happens? Like, when no one's on it. But like, sometimes the questions are really, really simple ones. You don't have to go go for these crazy outcomes. You can just say, hey, what if the Steelers passing game is better with the quarterback change? Like, that's a pretty reasonable sort of thing to ask. That doesn't seem that crazy, right? So like, I love situations like that where you can kind of get, like, the what if question you're asking is a very simple and reasonable one that doesn't need a ton to go right in order for you to win, right? You're not trying to navigate this super thin needle you're trying to thread. You're just saying, hey, what if the quarterback change to a quarterback who's going to throw more results in better outcomes for the Steelers passing game? That's it, right? And then again, the Breece Hall captain, like, talked about that. outlier outcome where you have the 1-5 construction, but from a logical standpoint, it does make sense how, one team's production is just super, super concentrated and the others is spread out. And though it doesn't hit that often, it's also 1-5 constructions are not played at a very high rate. So it's a very contrarian approach, but it's not necessarily a bad approach. It's just the kind of approach where it's not going to win very often, but when it does, you're going to win in a way that doesn't have a lot of duplication.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Love that analysis. Yeah, just super interesting build, and I still am shocked. I just you pointed it out. I didn't really realize how low owned Russ was. So, yeah, great stuff, man. Well, let's jump into the DraftKings lobby here and look at tonight. And again, we're gonna be targeting this game between the Chargers and Cardinals. It is Chargers at Arizona. We typically kind of just go with the smaller field. So I'll just jump into the hard count here. And yeah, man, where do you want to start here? You got 4 Cardinals at the top there when you're looking at captain first. How are you looking at this game? Where do you want to start this build?
Yeah, so, okay. The sort of quick version of the game analysis is that the Chargers have been almost like video game level good on defense. They're allowing 12 point something points per game, which is absolutely insane. And they're off to a winning record to start their season, largely because of their defense. Their offense has been not great, but their defense has been the best in the league in terms of just allowing points. They're preventing points. The Cardinals are sort of the opposite. Their offense has been reasonably good, not elite, but they can score points. They've got some good pieces, and their defense has been atrocious. And so you have these sort of diametrically opposed teams, and that when you have that, you can build in a lot of different ways, because when a team's strength and weakness line up like that, like Cardinals, weak offense versus Chargers weak offense versus Cardinals weak defense, and Arizona solid offense versus Chargers solid defense, you can sort of envision the game going a bunch of different ways. You could see each team could struggle or succeed in any of those sort of four areas. So the Chargers offense could outperform expectations, but also the Cardinals defense could outperform expectations. That wouldn't really surprise us because the Chargers offense sucks, right? So you can sort of envision it going any different way, and that gives us a lot of flexibility in how we can choose to build. And you can approach this game in any way you want. There are a couple of interesting unknown. There's one really interesting unknown that we may not know. We may not know until game time, until inactives. We may get news earlier in the day. And that is the Chargers have opened the activation window for DJ Chark to be activated from injured reserve. They opened the window on Wednesday. He's been practicing. He's officially listed questionable. But if you go look in DraftKings, if you go find him, he's 3K. He's down at the bottom. He still has the IR tag on him. And so that can very much keep people off of him when they're building lineups, right? They don't see a questionable tag, they see an IR tag, and a lot of more casual players will just think, oh, that means he's out, right? That means he's not playing. So the IR tag can very easily drive down ownership and keep him sort of ignored by the field. Again, depending on when we get the news, right? If you go look at major projection sites, most major projection sites are projecting him out. And so he might be out. This might all be for nothing, right? This could totally all be for nothing. But I think it's more likely than not that he plays. I guess I'm not a doctor, but I think maybe the more correct way to phrase that would be, I think that if he plays, he creates an interesting dynamic in this game if he plays, because I think a lot of people won't be expecting it. I think, if we get the news just at inactives that he's active, people will know what to do with it. He won't have been projected as being in all day. So people who started looking at the slate and building lineups, earlier in the day, unless they go back to their lineups, they won't have him in. And people just won't know what to expect from him. DJ Chark is a very capable pass catcher. And the Chargers offense is not exactly dripping with talent. So, we could very much see DJ Chark step into a fairly significant role, especially with Quentin Johnson. He's doubtful. He's likely to miss. Ladd McConkey is probably going to play, but he's questionable, so it's possible we get a surprise there. I think he's playing. Anyway, Chark is an interesting piece because whenever you get late news, it's always an edge because people don't have as much time to think through it and prepare for it and think about what they're going to do and read up on guys and read up on a role. But like Chark is a very good deep threat receiver. So he's the kind of guy who can, he can hit on 2 or 3 targets at 3K. The price is there for him to hit on 2 or 3 targets. The matchup is great. So he's an interesting piece in this game. And then you have who I think is, the one of the great stories of the season is JK Dobbins, right? Yep. JK Dobbins with the Ravens, he was always super, super talented, but he racked up just a really nasty injury history during his time there. And you always just kind of felt bad for the guy because when he was on the field, he was incredibly talented, but just can never stay on the field. And, I wish the best for him this year. I'm always a little bit nervous with a guy like that, but this year he has been amazing for the Chargers, and we were on him in best ball. Like he's one of my highest running backs in best ball. We were on him at OWS in week 1 and week 2. Week 1, no one was playing him and he was super cheap and he put up like 25 points at no ownership. And his workload has continued to increase, right? He's gotten like 18, 27 touches in the last 4 games. Week 1, they had some training wheels on him. Those have come off, and he's been getting like significant workloads. The Chargers want to run the ball. The Chargers are, I believe it was the 5th lowest team in pass rate over expectation so far this season. If you're not familiar with PROE, basically it looks at the scenarios that a team finds itself in and says, what's the expected pass rate in this scenario? And then how often do they actually pass? And so a team that sucks and trails all the time, you'd expect to have a very high pass rate because they're playing catch up from behind late in games. The Chargers have been winning. The Chargers, it looks at scenarios like how often are they in the 2-minute drill at the end of a half, like where you expect pass rate to be heavier. So the Chargers have roughly a 50% pass rate, 50% run rate, which is already insane in today's NFL. And then it's about 7% lower than their expected pass rate of 57%, which is one of the lowest in the league. So they want to run the ball and they are giving it to JK Dobbins, and they appear to be confident in his health, and they appear to be, they're confident in his ability. He's rewarded them with, 5.4 yards per carry. Like he's been awesome. So he's a great story. I love the story for this guy, like coming back from the NFL, coming back from yet another brutal injury and being able to, resume his career and not just resume his career as a occasional backup rotational guy. They've got him in a kind of like an RB1 heavy workload kind of role, and he's succeeding in it. So love JK Dobbins anyway. He's probably the single strongest piece in this game. Kyler Murray might outproject him in raw points, but Kyler Murray is a lot more expensive. Other than that, JK Dobbins is going to have the highest projection of any skill position player. And so I want to start with him at captain because the matchup is perfect. The Chargers are favorites in this game. The workload is awesome. Like the talent is there, talent, matchup, opportunity. He checks all those boxes. Price is fair, right? He's not a huge passing game back. So his price right around the 10K mark, as opposed to being like 11K, 12K, like you often see like a Breece Hall at. His passing game role is modest. So the price I think is fair, but fair price when he checks all the other boxes is awesome. So
absolutely love it. Love it, dude.
So he's my starting point. Now, I did mention in the write-up of this game that I think most people are going to be investing in this game from the perspective of, of the Chargers run game, because the Chargers pass game is so low volume. I do think an interesting way to play this is to invest heavily in the Chargers passing game, just because I think it's kind of like the Steelers last night, right? It's a similar position where you're basically saying, hey, the Chargers are not known for being an elite passing game, but like any given game, the touchdown, we can't predict where touchdowns go. The touchdowns come through the air any given time. So the Chargers passing game is a super interesting way to play this. I'm not going to do it for the purposes of this build because I have I have a different point of differentiation that I want to use in this build. But I do think going Chargers pass game heavy is a really compelling way to play this game, especially if you're doing multiple lineups.
Yeah. And like you said, something that you could do to be different that isn't crazy. It's not crazy off the wall. But I'm excited to hear where you do want to go with that other point of differentiation.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see like a lot of Ladd McConkey captain lineups, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, so next point is we're going to go for another Charger. And we are going to go Ladd McConkey. So, Quentin Johnson, who had a really rough rookie season last year, has been pretty good this season. He's not the Chargers' target leader, but he's been highly involved in the offense. He is doubtful. And so he's, generally speaking, guys who are listed doubtful miss. So Ladd, I think we're going to put in, Ladd is the Chargers leader in targets, in receiving yards, in catches, not in touchdowns. But again, we can't predict touchdowns, right? With a high degree of accuracy. So he's been their wide receiver one. He's adapted to the NFL quickly. Again, matchup here is great against a bad Arizona defense. I'm expecting he's going to play. He got limited practices all week, so it's more likely than not that he plays. I think he's essentially the Chargers wide receiver one for $7,800. You're already getting a discount effectively, right? Normally wide receiver ones are more expensive than that in Showdown. So you're already getting a discount on price that reflects that this is not a high volume offense. And then you also take Quentin Johnson out of the mix, and it's like, you kind of get to this, who else are they going to throw to? Right. Yeah. Situation. So I think Ladd McConkey is an excellent play who's underpriced for his role without Quentin Johnson. The Chargers pass offense as a whole is interesting to me because again, you take a piece out and they're so cheap. But Ladd is the wide receiver one, and so he's the one I want to plug in. Now we have a lot of salary to play with because we started with a captain who's, he's expensive, but he's not like one of the top most expensive guys. Ladd is a fairly cheap wide receiver one. So now we're going to plug in my favorite Cardinals offensive duo, which is Kyler Murray and Trey McBride. So the Cardinals have three main offensive pieces here, right? Outside of Kyler, three main skill position players. They've got Marvin Harrison Jr., they've got Trey McBride, and they've got James Conner. So the Chargers defense has been really good against the run. They've been good all around, but some of that's a bit of an illusion, right? Of how good the Chargers defense has been, in that they're allowing kind of fairly middle of the road, like passing yardage per game. Like they just have been they've been stopping teams from scoring, from turning drives into scores, and they've had really good luck on when they've gotten their turnovers, right? They just happen to get turnovers at opportune rates. I do think they're really good against the run. I think they're more middling against the pass. Like they're fine, they're not bad. I think they're going to end up being slightly above average at the end of the season, but not the number one defense by points allowed that they are today. Trey McBride is, I think, the best way to attack here. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been very, very boom bust so far in his career. What makes me nervous about him, his catch rate is awful. Like he's caught under half the targets that have been thrown his way. He only really has one game that you'd be really happy with for his price. And if you look at his games, like let's take out the Green Bay game because he got concussed very early. He failed against San Francisco and Buffalo, which are two good pass defenses. The games in which he's had his better games, the Rams are an awful defense. Washington is an awful defense. The Lions are an okay defense, but they're such a pass funnel that you see 11 targets, right? So like this matchup is much more on the negative end than the positive end for Marvin Harrison Jr. And so he's fine in tournaments. He certainly has a huge ceiling, and he's going to have a great NFL career, right? Tons of talent. But the matchup points me to McBride over Harrison as my preferred play in this price range. So of the three Cardinals skill position, like primary players, McBride is hands down my favorite.
Yeah. And just for those of you quickly listening on the podcast, when you look at Marvin Harrison, 7 targets, 2 receptions against the Niners, 11 targets, 5 receptions against Detroit, and on down the list. So like you said, he does have the one game against Washington where he had 5 receptions on 6 targets. But overall, you're right. Whether it's Kyler not putting the ball in catchable positions that often, or Marvin just not getting the separation he needs, he's not catching many of his targets, not nearly as many as you'd want.
Yeah, and he'll get there, right? He'll get there. And he could get there this game, right? And I'm not saying don't play him. I'm going to play him. I'm just going to lean more McBride in that spot for me. There's also, and then the Arizona, like the rest of the Arizona passing game is a bit hard to figure out right now because Zay Jones, and another bit of sort of weirdness / uncertainty for this game. We have Zay Jones coming back from suspension and hamstring injury, and he's going to resume some kind of role. Probably Greg Dortch is the guy who's most impacted by Zay Jones's return, but it could also, to some extent, impact Michael Wilson. And so again, that makes the rest of the Cardinals passing game, they're not unplayable. They're just overpriced, right? They're over because also keep in mind that Marvin Harrison was concussed. And generally speaking, as the league has gotten more serious with how it treats concussions, it has become increasingly uncommon for guys to return from a concussion the following week, right? They generally miss at least 1 week. And so the rest of the Cardinals were all priced up a little bit, be expecting that there's a good chance Marvin Harrison misses. So like Michael Wilson's more expensive than he would otherwise be. Zay Jones is more expensive. Like all those guys are all priced up a little bit. So the Cardinals passing game is just, they're all a little bit more expensive than they quote unquote should be, or at least than they should be for sharing the field with MHA. And so that just makes the other kind of the ancillary guys a little harder to play. Again, doesn't mean you can't, doesn't mean they can't hit. Like, they get a touchdown, they can still have a good game. But, our price sensitivity in this game, in Showdown, is less. We should be less price sensitive than we should be on main slate. But, it's still a factor in putting together lineups. And so guys like Wilson and Zay Jones just kind of pop off as being overpriced and a little bit harder to get in lineups. Okay, now we're down to value range. I think you can probably guess what I'm putting in here, which is DJ Chark. And I talked about why, right? Like he has... he's the kind of guy who can hit on 3 targets. He's very good as a deep threat receiver. He's overall a good pass catcher when he's healthy. He hasn't been healthy a lot, and he's also had some really poor offenses overall. But like when healthy, he's a good pass catcher. And 3K, he could easily step into the wide receiver 2 role. Because who else do the Chargers have? Like they've got Simi Fehoko, who's like this journeyman guy. He's kind of a body. They've got Josh Palmer, who I thought was good, I guess. He was widely expected to be the Chargers wide receiver 1 going into the year, but for whatever reason, the Chargers are down on him, and like his snaps have been down, his target volume has been modest, and so again, like he's going to be on the field, and he could have a good game. You never know like what's going to happen in a given game, but like the Chargers are showing us that they don't think Josh Palmer is their guy. Like he's a guy, he's on the team, he's on the field, but they've clearly shown us by how they were using Quentin Johnson and Ladd early this season that Josh Palmer's not the guy to them. And so it would not surprise me if Chark comes back and he immediately steps into the wide receiver 2 role in Johnson's absence. We'll know more later today, but I think that for the upside at just 3K, I think that's a risk worth taking to me. And I will note, by the way, that if he is out, if Chark is out, and you want to play the same construction, Will Dissly is only 2,600 as the Chargers' primary tight end, with Hayden Hurst doubtful and expected to miss. Awesome. And so, you can just, if you want to, you can just swap Chark for Dissly. I do think that will be a higher owned version of this lineup. And so if you want to figure out a way to differentiate further from here, you certainly could try to do so. But I think that's, if you just want to make a 1v1 pivot, like you do have a 1v1 pivot available to you. And then the final piece we're going to put in is I want another Arizona piece. I want to run a balanced lineup. This is a close spread, 1.5 spread, or at least it was last night when I last looked. It's a 1.5 point spread, so close spread. So close spreads tend to lead themselves to a normal construction of like you want 3-3 as your sort of default. And again, you can be different here. This is another area where you can decide to differentiate in a close spread game. You go 4 or 5 on one side and expect and think that the game actually is not close. That's a good point of differentiation. It's not the one I'm going for here, but because that's the path we're going for in this one. I'm going to go with Ryland, Chad Ryland, who is the Cardinals kicker. And again, since we have Trey McBride as the only skill position player on the Cardinals. And so what this tells us is we can succeed with Ryland at kicker because we don't need the Cardinals to score a bunch of touchdowns here in order for Kyler Murray and Trey McBride to end up in the optimal lineup. 1, maybe 2 touchdowns will do it. And the rest can be field goals. And so, if McBride gets 1 touchdown or he gets 2 or he gets one goes somewhere else to a guy who's not fantasy relevant, Ryland can easily be the guy here. And with 3 field goals, put him in the optimal lineup. I'll also note that, again, if you want to differentiate, slide this lineup a little bit differently, you could go Kimani Vidal here, right? Who is cheaper than Ryland,
Yes.
who is the RB2 for the Chargers now with what's his name? With Gus Edwards going on injured reserve. Kimani Vidal is not going to be a high volume guy, but he's a capable pass catcher, and he caught a 30-something yard touchdown last week. Obviously not going to happen every week, but you could pivot this lineup that way if Chark is out. And again, if Chark is out, what you could consider is going a 4-2 Chargers construction. Disley is going to be a fairly common popular value pick, but going Disley and then moving Ryland to Vidal would, I think, be a way to get away from some of the duplication, some of the ownership, if you don't get Chark.
Yeah, great stuff, man. And yeah, the RB2 seems to be, it's been the cheat code already far too often here in through 7 weeks. So great stuff, Xandamere. For those of you listening on the podcast, the lineup we landed on: JK Dobbins at the captain, Ladd McConkey, Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, DJ Chark, who, again, pay attention tonight, see what the inactives and actives are once they release them. And if Chark is active, then, again, this could be a big edge that the field is not going to adjust to, the same as if Chark was already listed as he's playing, and then Ryland to finish out the lineup. So Xandamere, yeah, and I appreciate how you always explain like the Kyler Murray McBride, and then why you can put Ryland in a kicker with those two. Explain why that can work, why you don't need multiple. You can still get there with Murray and McBride scoring a pair of touchdowns, and then the kicker as well. That's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And then I will just note, if we get weird news, if we get news around who's playing, who's not playing, and there's something unexpected in there, like, this is when it's great to be in the OWS Discord, right? You can find links to it just on the website on oneweekseason.com. Our Discord is a great place to be, to talk through strategy when we get unexpected things, because it's hard to update, it's hard to update the article, like the game write-up, in time. And obviously we can't come update this video when inactives come out. So, be in the Discord. It's a great place to talk through strategy and talk through how to adjust to news depending on who's in, who's out. We have a great community of folks in there. I'm in there. But we also have a really, really sharp community of players who are, consistent, profitable plus EV players in there who are good at talking through like how to think about the situation. This guy's in, this guy's not. What should we do? So highly encourage you to be in there. It's a really, really, really great place to be, really great community, and very, very sharp people in there.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I will link the Discord down in the show notes below, so check that out, guys. And anyone can jump in there in most of those channels. I know there are some that are gated, like Inner Circle, but Showdown, I believe anyone can get in, right?
I believe that's correct. Yes.
I've jumped in there before, and yeah, with stuff breaking within the last hour or two before kickoff, that is absolutely the place to be. So make sure to check out the link in the show notes. Xandamere, great stuff as always. Thanks for your thoughts. Good luck tonight, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, good to see you. Good luck to you as well.
All right, see you guys. Thanks for tuning in.